Welcome, everyone. My name is Gabby Pirro, and I head up events and delegations here at the Pacific Council. Today, we will explore the compelling themes in Loretta Napoleoni's latest book, Technocapitalism, The Rise of the New Robber Barons and the Fight for Common Good. This book just released last week on April 18th, so it's super timely. In this thought-provoking work, Loretta challenges us to examine how the digital revolution has transformed into a tool for concentrated power and profit, and what this means for society's future. That said, let me introduce you to our distinguished guest speakers who will enrich our discussion. Loretta Napoleoni is an esteemed economist, international best-selling author, and investigative journalist. As a Fulbright scholar at Johns Hopkins University and the London School of Economics, Loretta has deep insights into the intersections of economics, technology, and global affairs. She has consulted governments and international organizations on terrorism, financing, and has authored several acclaimed books translated into multiple languages. Mr. Martin Roschbauer, our presider, brings a unique perspective as co-founder of the Tech Diplomacy Network and Austria's first tech ambassador in Silicon Valley. With a focus on tech diplomacy and digital humanism, Martin is passionate about leveraging frontier technologies for planetary challenges while emphasizing ethical considerations in diplomacy. Together, they'll guide us through Loretta's groundbreaking analysis and the urgent questions posed by the rise of technocapitalism. We will reserve questions at the end of the discussion, so please be sure to include your questions in our chat. And without further ado, let's dive in. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here at the Pacific Council and to talk to Loretta Napoleoni and her exciting book that is only 7 days since its publication. So it's a really early, great insight into the topics that you raise in this book, Technocapitalism, the Rise of the New Robber Barons and the Fight for the Common Good. And I read the book and I was intrigued by the fact that you have a very strong thesis about what is going on, but you're not subordinating everything to this thesis. But in this book, you're also describing what is going on and explaining what is going on, many phenomena of our current moment. You describe in details and in a very, very explainable and transparent way. So this is also a very educational book, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. Loretta, when we talk about the title Technocapitalism, it is really a concept for this moment. And I would like to ask you what you mean with techno-capitalism or other words that you use to describe the moment, present, future, or the great transformation. What is going on and what prompted you to write this book?
Well, thank you, Martin. Well, basically, the original title of the book was Present Future because it described the condition that we're all living in at the moment. So we're in the present, but we're constantly also in the future because technological innovation moves so quickly that it's impossible to keep pace with it. Now, of course, this generates in the individual also anxiety because you always feel that you're never up to the change. So that was the original idea. And then, the concept of techno-capitalism is very much related to that. So we have a capitalist system which has morphed into a new system, which is very much similar, I would say, to the traditional capitalism, but it is focused on technology. Now, about that, I must say one thing which is fundamental in the difference between the traditional capitalism and the techno-capitalism. So, in the Industrial Revolution and then the evolution of capitalism, classic evolution of capitalism, you have capital and you have labor, two factors. Here, you actually do not have two factors. You actually have three factors, because you have capital, you have technology, and then you have labor, which plays a very, very small role in comparison to what it was in the original capitalist system. So that is an important difference.
But if you look at the title, what it also suggests is that this new form of capitalism, transformed through technology, and I think you're also referring to specific new technologies, right? It's not old technologies, those transformative, pioneering technologies, and we can talk about them, which ones we are talking about, that have changed capitalism in a way, as the title also suggests, that it is destroying or threatening the common good. Now, in traditional theory, when we talk about Adam Smith or capitalism in general, the market force, there's always competition, there's always greed. It's built in, but the invisible hand somehow then is supposed to create also the common good. Why is that no longer the case?
Well, because of this fundamental difference between the traditional capitalism and the techno-capitalism. So if you look at Adam Smith's theory of the invisible hand, it's very much related to the interaction that there is between capital and labor. I mean, at the end of the day, labor is the one who is pushing for, the common good. So we have the workers, the initial exploitation of the workers, change into the trade, through the trade unions, into a more participation, more salaries, more benefits. So I mean, the common good generates from the interaction between capital and labor. Now here we don't have that kind of interaction anymore, because it's not only the equation, it's not only capital and labor. In the middle we have technology, and technology is becoming more and more and more important in this equation. So the weight, I would say, of technology has become more important. So look, for example, at space. I mean, I talk in the book about space exploration. The idea that the human being will go and mine asteroids, it's impossible, because our body cannot withstand that kind of environment. So we will have robots for sure. We will have artificial intelligence also directing the way this exploration is going to be done. So at that point, so this is the end, I would say, of the techno-capitalism adventure. We're still at the beginning, but in that situation, the human being will be irrelevant. So that creates, big imbalances in terms of common good, meaning the decision to how to use the benefits of the technological innovation for the common good is up to whoever controls technology. Is not up to those who participate in the production of technology.
So one of the themes that you also bring up, which is also, of course, a theme going back in the history of our institutions and our institutional setups, is the concept of the nation state. That, of course, traditionally is there to provide a framework, to keep checks and balances, to represent also in some ways the common good, or at least to assure it. And you're saying one of the chapters has the title, "The End of the Nation State." So why do you think is our nation states, and this comes from a career diplomat, so in some ways representing a nation state, a very small one, throughout my career, why do you think our nation states are no longer capable to keep that balance?
I think the nation state is under threat from technology. I mean, there are several examples in the book, particularly the two most relevant are, the cryptocurrency, for example. So, the Bitcoin in reality is challenging the monopoly of money in the hands of the state. The moment in which, the state loses that monopoly, things are going to change dramatically in terms of society, but also in terms of production. So, even the capitalist system may actually be completely reformed because of that. There is nothing actually that the nation state can do at the moment to stop. I'm talking about the Bitcoin, I'm not talking about the other cryptocurrencies. But we've seen how the Bitcoin, which was introduced in 2008, today has actually become one of the components of high finance. So yes, enter into the mainstream of finance. Another example is mapping. Actually, I do like that chapter very much because the projection of space has always been monopoly of the states. So the states project the image of the space according to what the states wants you to believe. So you see the maps of the British empires that describe the areas of the British Empire in much larger size than the rest of the world, just to emphasize the importance of the empire and the power of the empire. Today, the mapping is done by Google, for example. Google Maps is the blue dot, which is one individual. So the description of the state is a projection of the individual. The space is not anymore, a social space, a political space, the space of the nation, but it becomes the space of the individual. So all of these elements are eroding what has been traditionally, the role of the nation state within a society.
And I agree with that. The notion that the big tech titans, as you call them, have in some ways encroached on a number of phenomena that are traditionally ascribed to the nation state. We can kind of call it elements of national sovereignty, have in some ways been not taken over, but they're now a contested ground between the tech titans and the nation state, which is why in diplomacy, and this has been my area of interest over the last years, we try to counter that with this notion of tech diplomacy. In some ways, it's almost like recognizing the power that some of these tech titans have acquired in international relations, as well as, of course, in domestic politics. So my question to you is, what shall the nation state do? There's been also, a talk about the return of the nation state since, I would say, about 6 years after the techlash in Silicon Valley, 2017, 2018. There's been a number of very strong signs coming, particularly from the European Union, but also from around the world, with regulation and policy measures to rein in some of the phenomena you described. Do you think it is enough? Do you think this is a sufficient, or do you think this is just in reality another sign of the helplessness of the nation state?
Of course, the way forward to protect the nation state, and when we talk about nation state, I think we also have to understand that we're not talking about only this state. We're talking about society. So inside the nation state, it is the society. Well, I think regulation for sure is the way forward. But again, going back to the concept of the present future that we discussed at the very beginning, the problem is that technological innovation moves so fast that it's very difficult for legislation to keep pace. But legislation is by definition slow because it has to be slow. Of course, regulation cannot come, like in few days or few weeks. But here we have major changes really taking place literally in days or weeks. So the problem is to predict the direction how the technological innovation is going to affect the nation state and how to protect it. And that, I think, the EU has tried to do that. I mean, think about the privacy legislation which was introduced by the EU years ago, which protects, of course, the individual from the usage of its own data. Now, that's something like this, nobody had thought about that. But the real obstacle, I think, is the power that this tech titan or robber barons, as we want to call them, have accumulated. And this is not only a power in terms of profits. So it's not only the fact that they are billionaires and they're the richest men in the world. It's also the fact that they control a technology which is used globally. So their reach is not national, it is global. So how are you going to regulate it? Because, I mean, each country, of course, has legislation which are limited to the nation state, as you know, to the borders of the nation state. I mean, I think, the example of TikTok at the moment is illuminating, because here we have an app which is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, but it is widely used in the United States. So the United States is trying to remove that ownership for various reasons, including spying. I mean, we don't know exactly how this is happening, but let's assume that this is happening, that there is spying through TikTok. But then, I mean, yesterday I read in the Wall Street Journal that the Biden campaign is going to use TikTok in any case, even if on the other side they're trying to block it. So do you understand? The power is so entrenched within our system that carry on a campaign, a presidential campaign, not using TikTok may be a negative decision for for the Biden administration.
Yeah, I want to just ask you again about the notion of the end of the nation state, which, if you look at just foreign affairs, and we're here at in a kind of foreign affairs environment at the Pacific Council, so many of the events of the last year, the two major conflicts in the Middle East and the Ukraine war, then also the increasing geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, which has a very, very strong, if not predominant, technology component to it, points to the fact that the nation state, as not as societal maybe, but as the political institutions, is trying to assert itself. And I was wondering what you see, how you see the role of these big tech companies, in these particular conflicts we're talking about.
I think the tech companies know that the nation state is going after them, if only for tax reasons. I mean, you can see that the ability that they have to not to pay taxes in the high rate tax system, because of course they have a global reach. The nation state is trying to prevent all of that. I also think that there is a tentative to influence politics at various level. I mean, you mentioned the war in Ukraine. So we had when the war started, we had Elon Musk offering Starlink for free to the fighters in the Ukraine. Now, de facto, Elon Musk took a position in a conflict, which made a big difference. In the old days, no individual, no single company could play such a role. But today, it does play such a role. So how does, the nation state deals with it? Because I mean, in this case, of course, Elon Musk took a position which was in line with our nation state. So I'm talking about, Europe, and I'm talking about the US. But what if he had taken a position on the other side?
Well, he
I mean,
did, kind of, right? Did he not at some point come up with
well,
a
yes, at
plan
some
that,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is another story where, Google Map, for example, after the invasion and the assimilation, as we want to call it, of Crimea by, the Russian regime that started to present Crimea, the peninsula, as part of Russia. And again, here we have, private company which has tremendous power, taking a position where the nation state has nothing to do with that, or where the nation state cannot do anything, because the truth is that the United States or Europe or the EU could not stop Google from doing what it was doing, and neither could stop Elon Musk.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to go back a little bit in history, because there I think your chapter, the historic chapter on some of the phenomena that we're seeing today, mainly you're going back to the 90s and the rise of the internet, and you call it kind of the cipher punks, because it has a lot to do with the kind of preoccupations and the hopes and aspirations the early fathers and founders of the internet had. And there you point correctly to the fact that this was also done in a attempt to emancipate the individual from the nation state. If I think of the
Yes.
Declaration cyber independence in the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So this was a deliberate attempt in a very libertarian mood to use the opportunities and the potentials of the digital space, the newfound digital world, the cyber world, to emancipate oneself from state control and surveillance.
Yeah, but this took place in a particular moment in history. So the cypherpunks were people that grown up during the Vietnam War. So there was there was a relationship with the states which was not necessarily positive. On the contrary, I mean, they were extremely resentful towards, we're talking about, of course, the United States, for what they had been doing during the Vietnam War. So there was no trust, say, that's a correct word, towards the state. And the fear was that the state would manipulate the internet. So the internet was seen at the very beginning as an area where people could be themselves a very egalitarian dimension of life, a very democratic dimension of life. So the fear was that the state would try to get inside this area and spy. I mean, the first thing, of course, was to spy the individual. So that's why, they developed cryptography to talk to each other in order to prevent the state from, spying on them. But if you then see the evolution of the internet, you can see that this desire of creating egalitarian space has failed tremendously, because I mean, at the end of the day, you see how the high-tech revolution has taken shape. So we have the formation of oligopoly, we have the formation of monopolies. We have also we have seen in the 2000 and 2010, even today, strategies to block competition. So we can't say that we're seeing a fair competition. On the contrary, we see a competition which is very much unfair. So the dream of the cyberpunk at the end of the day was it never really took shape. And partly, as we said before, it never took shape because the state was not involved, because their vision of the state was definitely wrong. I mean, the state, yes, can be 100% oppressive, but can also be, as in the case of our democracy, the great equalizer. And it should be such.
But isn't also an irony of the cypherpunks and their dreams and aspirations that the state actually sometimes, particularly when it's an authoritarian state, actually can use those tools of the internet in a much better way in some ways, and can actually use those very tools that were meant as a tool of emancipation, even of liberation, use those tools in order to survey and to control.
Yes, of course. I mean, this is, I mean, if you look at China, for example, the way that the internet is structured in China is very much conditioned to whatever the state wants you to access and whatever the state doesn't want you to access. It's also true that the internet and all of these instruments which have come about through the high-tech revolution have been used by criminal organization, have been used by terrorist organization. If you think about the promotion campaign of the Islamic State, I mean, it's extraordinary how, through the internet, they have reached out to people in different parts of the world, convincing them to join in a totally insane adventure. So yes, but in everything, I mean, in any innovation, there is the positive and the negative. And here we go back to the concept of the nation state. I mean, who can prevent the negative from outstripping the positive? I mean, who can prevent the technological innovation to be damaging, to damage society instead of enriching society?
And answering that question, or trying to go one route where some of these early thoughts of the libertarians and the cypherpunks I don't think it's all gone. I think there's a lot of people who still think, that the web, maybe, the Web3, decentralized governments and DAOs, decentralized networks that are independent from the nation state could solve some of those governance questions. You also point out that Bitcoin and the blockchain and crypto had this kind of libertarian origins, and can also, provide a lot of positive potential for solutions, as well as the opposite, this kind of dual, use of technology.
Yeah.
Do you see that there is some hope in some of these libertarian utopian views of decentralized government of the Web3?
Well, I think the word libertarian somehow disturbs me because it has a negative connotation, whereby you basically are against it's you and the state. No, it shouldn't be like that at all. I think the Bitcoin, for example, is definitely one of these products of the cyberpunk. In fact, tried to produce a digital currency, but they couldn't because the only sector of the exchanges within the internet that could not escape the control of the state was the payment. Because I mean, you have to use either credit card or you have to use a bank account. So it's traceable. So, and that thing disturbed them. And then, all of a sudden, the Bitcoin came about, and the Bitcoin solved that major issue that they couldn't actually address. But I think the Bitcoin is fundamental also to offer an alternative to money. I mean, the truth is, that the money that we use are actually an act of fate. I mean, there is since 1971, when Nixon declared the end of the gold exchange standard, so the dollar was not any longer linked to any reserves in gold. Basically, what is the engine of the money supply is the debt. And the debt, it's okay because it's a society that borrows against itself in order to produce more wealth. So the problem comes when it's an excessive debt, but we're not getting into that. So we do not have a currency which is linked to something different from the debt. The Bitcoin provides an alternative. It also provides a way whereby every single transaction is perfectly traceable through the blockchain. I mean, I find it an absolutely major innovation. Now, that could come handy also for the state. Now, of course, the state will never be able, or the central bank will never be able to control Bitcoin because, the concept is that the Bitcoin is controlled by the people. So it's the currency of the people. But at the end of the day, also the dollar is the currency of the people. I mean, the reason why the dollar still circulates is because all of us, the people, believe that that amount of dollars is enough to buy certain kind of things, even if it's simply a piece of paper. So I see that as an innovation. I don't see that as a negative. I don't see necessarily the Bitcoin as being in contraposition to the state, providing, of course, that the state embrace it in the right way. So it becomes a threat to the nation state the moment in which the state decides to go against it and not to, which hasn't happened, of course. But interestingly enough, it happened with previous currencies, previous digital currencies that were introduced. They cannot go against the Bitcoin because they don't know who is behind the Bitcoin, and they can't go against the software because it's software. So, I mean, the implications are enormous, but they're not unsolvable, I think. So from that point of view, I think that a decentralization should be welcome, providing this decentralization doesn't generate into chaos. Then, we really slide into dystopia. But I think here for the time being, the simple fact that the Bitcoin now is part of the financial system, I think this is also a form of control and regulation.
So in some ways, you're also pointing out that the integration of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies into the financial system is a positive sign that finally the promises and the volatility that kind of is decreasing of the currencies is now in a longer perspective taking shape.
Yes, it's working. Now, of course, it's going to take, I mean, the Bitcoin, the 21 million will be released in total only by the beginning of next century. So we're at a very early stage, but it's moving in the right direction.
I want to also talk about two other very fundamental topics you touch upon. One is climate change, which is kind of the biggest challenge for us all, and the kind of real test probably of these tech titans, because in some ways they are part of the problem. They consume a lot of energy, but on the other hand, we also know that these new technologies will be necessary as a part of the solution. What do you think will be the necessary changes in the international system and in the regulation and oversight over these large tech companies in order for us as humanity to better face the healing of the planet, as you call it, or climate change?
I think climate change should be back into the global agenda, which is not, unfortunately, at the moment. There is so much that technology can do. That mean just among the many examples, we can harvest the solar power directly from the low Earth orbit and then transmit it to Earth, and in that way we can solve most of the energy problem that we're facing today. I mean, the Chinese are building a solar plant in the low Earth orbit, but we're not. I mean, the US actually has been researching on this particular technology to produce the microwave weapon, so from the low Earth orbit to Earth. So you see that the emphasis is not on saving the planet. The emphasis is on different industries. Now it so happened that the arm industry at the moment is the one that is benefited the most. AI, these new weapons that which have been tested in the Ukraine and also in Gaza. So you can see that the emphasis is on something that is not what is beneficial for us. So it's not for the common good. So the technological industry, so the big tech titans, of course, they go after the areas on maximization of profits, because I mean that's normal. That's what anybody would do. So we need a political intervention in order to change that, and for sure, the effort to use technological innovation to save the planet from climate change requires massive investments and commitment, which I do not think the private industry, even if these individuals, some of these individuals are richer than the entire nation, I do not think that they have the muscle to approach and solve this kind of problem. This is a problem that has to be solved or addressed initially at political level. What does the individual can do? Well, I think the individual can put pressure upon the politician, but the individual needs to know in the first place that we do have the technology to to solve most of these problems, and I don't think people know that.
Yeah, you've mentioned already space as one of this kind of new area of commercialization, and in some ways the area where these tech titans operate or aspire to operate. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying that this particular commercialization of the near space, which has happened over the last years, also points into the wrong direction because the aspirations are wrong. It's ultimately about maximizing profits and not, in reality, using space as a potential for future collaboration and solutions, planetary solutions. So I was wondering if you see everything that is happening, in the near space as necessarily negative. I mean, private companies maybe sometimes also more efficient to do certain elements. If you think of space rockets that can return and maybe are run in a more commercial way, particularly when there is actually competition and not a monopolization. So my question, when you look at, and in the last chapters, you talk about these big dreams that some of the tech titans have professed that they're maybe motivated about, the colonization of Mars being one of them. Whether you see all of this as negative, or whether you think if left by itself, that's the problem, because then it will just lead to this technocapitalism, and we should have a kind of a strong vision as nation states about what we want to do in space.
Well, the privatization of space was, I would say, overall positive, because I mean, until the sector was privatized, really, it was not profitable. So think about, the reusable rockets, for example, that you mentioned. Each time something went up to space, the rocket was wasted. So you had to start all over again. So the cost was absolutely astronomical. So the privatization has open up space. I mean, the low Earth orbit, of course, we're not talking about deep space, because deep space is prohibitive to us. It's not true what some of these the space barons are saying, that, oh, we can go colonize Mars. Absolutely not. Our body cannot withstand the condition of space. So that's not going to happen. But the low Earth orbit is accessible because there is still some gravity. And the low Earth orbit is the natural, let's say, last frontier of the planet. And there is a lot that can be done. Just gave you the example of, solar plants in the low Earth orbit. I mean, the problem at the moment is that this privatization, again, has created an oligopolistic industry whereby a very few group of individuals are active, because they are only people that can access in terms of financial investment, because the costs are absolutely prohibitive. Now, most of this is done in cooperation with the state, so with organizations like NASA, for example. So these are joint venture, but nevertheless, the objective of this colonization is very much, reproducing in space what is happening here. So what is the most important resource of the planet is us and our data. And so what is happening at the moment in the low Earth orbit? We have, the buildup of massive constellations of satellites in order to mine our resource, which is, of course, data. So connectivity is offered in exchange, for data. And all of this is taking place in an environment that's very similar to the far west of the gold rush. There is absolutely no regulation. There is no cleaning up of, the debris, which are immense. So satellites that become obsolete are left. And there will be a point not too far away in the future in which it will be difficult to get out of the planet because of the risk posed by the debris circulating around. Now, in all of this, of course, there are also positive things. And this is what we should focus on, and that's where